enough that we're being recorded.
And I'll bring the Concord School Committee meeting to order. Welcome, everyone.
So we don't have any public comment, so let's go right into recognitions.
Great, so tonight we invited the high school art department, so Mrs. Dunn's here with a few students to talk on their work, and I'm sure they'll tell it better than I will, so turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. It's always nice. I really am glad that some students have a chance to present their work. As a visual arts teacher, I always think about their technical skills are really important, but then the beauty of arts is that you can make your learning shareable, that it can actually be something that people want to look at and see and something of interest and a point of conversation. So I won't spend too much time other than saying I was in Rivers and Revolutions for 7 years, and I think one of my biggest takeaways from there is that relationships are so important in the learning process. And that's not just with me. I do have students call me Tracy or Miss Tracy or Miss Dunn if that's what they're most comfortable with, but usually Tracy or Miss Tracy work. And one of the part of why I invited these 3 students to share their work is not just because of the quality of what they've been making, but because of the relationship that they've built with each other to help each other and support each other and collaborate even through the learning experience where with a computer in a computer class, I was anxious that students would get too close to the relationship with their screen and not enough like working peer to peer. But these 3 have proven that teamwork does work best and collaboration really does happen even in a computer arts classroom. So I was gonna have Aiden start with sharing his website. So websites is how we decided we're going to be moving through our portfolios. And want me to click for you while you share?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I'll start. Hi, I'm Aiden Edmondson. I'm a junior at Concord-Carlisle High School, and I've been taking this course for just a semester now. And you just click on exercises, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So we started out the course just doing some creative stuff to get into I guess a better mindset for taking the course overall. So we did some. The first thing that we did was we had to take a tennis ball and make something out of it, non-functional but more creative. So I made Cedric and over by John. He had a little bit of his bottom lip his top lip. So yeah. And then after we finished up with that, we started getting into software, and my early work was not good at all. But as we started out, the first thing that we made was a submarine, and you could just see a little bit of what I did and the stages that I went through to reach the project. So it was like early work, and then as it progressed, it got a little bit better. And then process. And then after that, we did some 3D logo making. So we had to choose a couple organizations that we were interested in, and then we had to redesign the logo. It was still pretty early in the process, so my final project wasn't phenomenal, but I did the American Heart Association, and I tried to remake the logo, but as a 3D model. And I was just getting a little more familiar with the software again, and I got a little bit better. And then the latest project that we made was you can make a cuckoo clock, a scooter, or a snow globe. And I chose to make a scooter. And this was probably the best project I've made so far. You'll see better projects than any of mine. But yeah, just getting more familiarized with the software overall. So yeah, and you can see the process you can see sort of like steps I took and how much attention and detail went into each of the projects. So for the scooter in particular, you can see it started out just base with the scooter, added a handle and a little bit of detail to the wheels, and I was messing around with the coloring for a little while until I eventually reached my final project. And then I guess my biggest inspiration for taking the course was that I'm pretty interested in video games. So some of my favorite games that involve 3D graphics include, I guess, The Legend of Zelda was probably one of my favorite games ever. Overwatch is something I play pretty much daily, and then Minecraft is obviously a That's alright, yeah. Yeah, but that's pretty much, that was my journey through 3D graphics so far. Guess we'll move on to somebody a little bit more, familiar with the software than me, Sophia, you are up.
So I'll just share in between that part of what I wanted to do with these portfolios is put process on the website as much as any finished product. I think that for so many artists, they feel this pressure to only share like the end product when it's really beautiful and seamless, and then people think all you do is like magic, right? And by showing like how do you get to that step, then people start to understand like you toiled, you made decisions, you changed your mind, you shifted, and I like that all to be in the website, not just end product. So, Sophia?
Okay, I didn't 100% know I was signing up for this course when I did take it. I never like enjoyed the art course before, but this fit into my schedule and it sounded kind of cool. But like, turns out, oh no. But like, turns out it's fun. I'm really into like math and coding, and I make a lot of like video games, and then stop at the art because it seemed intimidating and like a little beyond me. So I have like a lot of ugly games, but this, fit in, and I've actually really liked it. So if you go to exercises, they're pretty similar to Aiden's. But we started out, it just looked like thinking a little more creatively, which is good for me because before this class, I was most comfortable in like logical thinking and like not really pushing that. So we did a lot of this sort of stuff. Yeah, it's the same sort of exercises again, just like understanding 3D space. And then we had to, I used that with Aiden. Mine wasn't like I don't know what it was, some strings and tennis balls. Then we got familiar with the software. You've seen this all before. It's the same sort of stuff. But then,
So that was a one-day challenge. I was out for a day doing a school visit elsewhere, so I gave them a one-day challenge, and probably out of 2 classes, like 3 students finished, and Sophia was one of them, which was really impressive, with learning how to do a screensaver that was animated 3D graphics.
yeah, that's cool. That also tied into math, which I liked, because it's like noise dictating the displacement of it, so that's pretty fun. And that was just probably me tackling it.
Yeah, I was like, no one wanted to pay attention to school on Halloween, so we tried to do a carving your pumpkin 3-dimensionally, and so the idea is all these things we're building 3-dimensionally are actually hollow, but I don't know that anyone realized that until we started making a jack-o'-lantern, that they're like a pumpkin, like everything you're doing is hollow that you're building, which is probably why 3D printing will come up next.
Yeah, sure, okay. So, my first project, I did 2 logos that I like recreated. One was for the Last Mile. They like go to prisons and like do like STEM education. And then the other one was Project Guardian, which is like making like it's about like data security and like open source software that's like protecting like journalists and stuff. So I thought that was fun. I got started with like the animation. And the next one was a snow globe. Snow globe is a strong word. I wanted to make a UFO, so I did. To blast around it. And then my final one is a scooter. I thought it'd be fun to make it look like a motorcycle, so I've got like some exhaust and stuff coming out of it. And yeah.
And I just want to share as you go back. Yeah, so a lot of this was one of the ways I like that you can differentiate in a classroom where you have computers is we hadn't gotten to the point yet where we learned how to do all these animations. So Sophia just went on and looked for tutorials, and she would skip ahead and then share good tutorials, which then get shared with the class, and then other people see, oh, okay, like it would be really interesting if my logo was spinning, so maybe I'll try and get that far. So she's been sort of a leader in showing, like, by just going online, you don't always have to wait for the teacher to come to you, but you can go straight to the resources yourself and follow the step by step. And yeah, her snow globe is a little bit easier to see when it's dark, but there's a lot of really cool lighting effects that are going on in there. And a lot of students were figuring out lighting from outside, but she was figuring out lighting from inside, like lighting inside your globe, which was really cool. Yeah, and her inspiration page is quite impressive.
What do you expect from us?
It's really quite impressive.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
And then other projects she's taken on her own, going above and beyond what we're doing in class.
The nice thing about the fact that it's like free. I can like, if I wanna make a little unfolding paper with some coins on it, like I can do that at home.
What are you using?
Cinema 4D.
So it's created by Maxon, and they do have free licenses for students.
That's great.
Wow.
Which is really, really great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so.
So, Avery is a freshman who's had a ton of fun video class.
Yeah, so I signed up for doing 3D graphics, not entirely knowing what was going to be happening in the class. I've done some 2D animation in the past, so I thought it would be interesting to try and step that up a dimension and see where that would go. So we again started out with the tennis project, and I did my project at, I think, after 10 o'clock at night because we didn't have glue. So I completely forgot to take progress photos, and that's what I ended up with.
Owl, a little owl
Yes.
guy.
We did some exercises in shading. I think that was even before the tennis ball project. And then for our first project, we had a submarine. And originally, the colors of my submarine were a little bit off from what they were supposed to be. And I had no idea. So Aiden let me know that my submarine looked a little bit off and helped me with that.
Is that when you realized you are colorblind?
Yeah.
I have a little limitation there.
And
Which I
then-
always find interesting, colorblind students frequently then move towards black and white pretty
Yeah.
quickly. Yeah.
And I probably would have made this screensaver in color, except I think the objects type wouldn't actually let us add color to it. But in the one class, there was a tutorial that we were following for each different type that we were making. And in this one, the person who was making the tutorial had a more updated version of the software. So they had tools that we didn't have. And so I had to figure out some ways to work around that. And I ended up with a slightly different final product than they had.
They're highly effective, right? That's good. And these exercises sort of open up with the idea of to create something convincing in a digital 3D world, you have to understand the forces that are happening in the natural in our 3D world. How does light fall? How does gravity work? How does texture look under different lighting situations? So we did a lot of work in the actual 3D world and in observational drawing before trying to figure out like how do you simulate that in a 3D world, right? And your final project?
So for our first project, we did the logos, and I started with the Museum of Science, and I made just their logo in 3D, and that took me a really short amount of time. So I decided to add a little bit, and so I added some fireworks and stuff. And then after that, I went on to design my own custom logo for a space travel agency. Because I found this really cool design with two shapes kind of inside each other. And I went with that, and I found out how to use materials, which are where you can take these properties for objects,
Surface textures?
yeah, and give them textures and colors and make them be reflective, things like that. And then for our most recent project, we got to choose between a snow globe, a cuckoo clock, and a scooter. And the first one I made was a snow globe, which, like with Aiden, is inspired by video games. This was inspired by a game called Hollow Knight. And a lot of the game takes place underground in kind of dark, dimly lit spaces. So I was trying to kind of model that while still making it visible in this. And then for my most recent project, I was making a cuckoo clock, and I made this sandbird, but then I decided that instead of having the bird coming out of the clock, I would have the clock on the bird. And then I made the clock and then decided, you know what? Why don't I also have birds coming out of the clock? So now there's both.
Yeah, you built this all today, basically.
I built it in 3 classes.
3 classes. I think I only just really saw where it was going today. Yeah, so I think it's sort of interesting where we just had like 3 exercises where we're all on the same page in lockstep, and then all of a sudden they've got the skills to go and take it wherever they want. And there's there's a tradition of artists borrowing and copying other artists in order to learn how to do things. So taking a game character or something in your earlier phases of trying to figure out how to make something is really a valuable process. And so a couple of people have naturally gone in that direction. And it's one that at first I was like, oh, but it's somebody else's creation. But then I realized the learning that you can do in terms of technicality is really huge. And then for me, just seeing I really love this inspiration section for me to start seeing into what are kids looking at, what is fascinating to them. And then they also can click on each other's websites, and then they start watching each other's inspiration and getting new ideas too. So you've got games, movies, and tools for your inspiration. So those are 3 students that happen to sit in a row, right? And just since the very beginning, to have 2 juniors and a freshman working together and sort of figuring their way through a program that none of them had any experience in before, I don't think, has been inspiring, really, really inspiring. When I invited them to come up here tonight, I was saying, I just think it's another level of, your website is one way to share, but just to keep on taking art and sharing it with an audience is sort of the best way to learn. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
It's really neat to see some of that process and not just the final product.
Yes, well, and I think being confident enough to put your process on display.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's not easy.
No.
So there you have it. Now, do you want me to? is
You
this
can
where
leave that
need
up
to
if
be?
you would,
Is this where
yeah.
you need to be?
Thank you so much.
Back to business.
Yeah.
So then,
Thank
I
you.
think they have several things to do this evening.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Don't
thanks
really
for
have to
staying.
stay.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so much
much.
for coming.
Sharing.
Well done.
It brings the art and STEAM to life.
Yes.
Somebody was asking us recently,
Very true.
does STEAM really include art? And here's the answer. It's great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Same to you. Night.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So moving on to minutes. We have the minutes we delayed last week, joint meeting 9/24/19. Any comments on those?
It's okay to me after a couple of reps.
So all in favor for the region?
I'll make a motion.
Oh, yes,
Do we have a motion?
Aye.
We need a
Thank you.
motion on behalf of both
Is that
committees to
I'll
approve the
make a
minutes.
motion that we approve the minutes of September 24th, 2019 for both.
I second for those.
All in favor for the region?
Aye. And all in favor for Concord?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Okay,
Okay,
Chair
anything
reports.
on Chair.
I don't have much today. I feel like we've been here a lot recently reporting out on everything. Middle school we'll talk about later, so.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else? I didn't have much to add to it today.
No, the only thing I would do, the town did forget the title of today, but,
Town governance.
yeah, the town,
Oh, yeah.
what's it called?
Town governance.
Let's just go with committee training.
Yeah,
it
it's,
was.
it's
Board committee
basically
training.
about, boards and committees and one thing that, came out of it is, we may be asked next year to have somebody present from a school committee role. Because it is, the way we do things is different than the select board and, different than most committees in town, actually, so, I think it would be valuable for, both for people, just another resource for people who might be thinking about running for school committee at some point, and also for people who are interacting with us. Liaison reports.
were there, speaking of that, if you were there, do you wanna tell us a little?
No, I think, I would highly recommend, everybody who can go next year. Especially building committee, it's really a great
This
resource.
is the.
I mean, every time I think I know it all, I don't know it all, so.
Right,
One of the things I was gonna ask Wally, was the vaping thing since our last meeting?
The resolution has been sent in.
No, the session we
Oh,
went to,
the event.
the high school.
The
It was
info
last
session.
Monday
It
night.
was like,
That was prior.
Yeah, we
Prior
talked
to
about
our
last
last
week,
meeting.
because there is another one, I don't remember the date. They're doing it in
December.
December. Yeah, okay, we'll talk about our next meeting. We'll get the date. But it was really good.
Anything else?
any other? No? Okay,
Correspondence, or a couple of,
just had a calendar question
Calendar
again,
question.
and I.
Yeah, the calendar committee's meeting the 19th,
Okay.
so I will have a draft to you probably for the first meeting in December, I would
Great.
expect.
Great.
So,
And there is is it CPAC sponsored on Thursday?
Thursday morning, Ruth Gruby and I are attending the regular CPAC meeting, so it's the annual trip for the director and superintendent to go. Obviously, it's a little bit more of a highlight this year with Ruth's arrival, so. Yeah.
But for,
Tomorrow evening, there's something.
That's,
Tomorrow evening?
yeah, tomorrow evening's a session, that's not with the
Oh, that's
administration.
with the, right,
That's CPAC.
rights and
itself.
responsibilities, I think,
Yeah.
tomorrow night.
okay,
The collaborative one with the other local CPACs in the area.
great. Go to their website, it's
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the CPAC, I have to say, the CPAC website is really good.
Yeah.
Who can, is that Carrie, is that you're doing?
No, Carol Yale,
That's,
And-
oh, Carol, yeah, it's really good,
I'm
a lot of stuff.
the publicist on that team. The website is updated, so all the events in the area are listed.
thank you. Moving right along, new business. Budget subcommittee charge, and the main reason this is here is because we need to set the first meeting of the budget subcommittee. And I thought it would be a good idea just to remind everybody why we formed it. We had a lot of discussion at our, in the process of setting this up last year. And the goal was, with the new finance director and the superintendent, to, sort of the high level piece was to go through the way we handle the budget process, and consider whether there were reasons to make adjustments, talk about some of the things that they wanted to do differently than had been done here before, and give us a forum to consider those things. And then what's meant to be ongoing is really related to the budget of the year we're in. So in our case, fiscal year 20. And to have an opportunity to get another level of detail about how the budget, how the actuals are progressing during the course of the year. And, in the event that we ran into some challenging budgetary issues, it would be a place that we could talk about them in a little more detail. And then, if there are things that come out of those discussions that we think would be good to bring to the whole committee as a consideration for changing the way we do things, we could do that. I think it's probably worthwhile to convene. I think it might be, I'm not on that committee, I don't
It's
think.
Cynthia Court and Dave.
Yeah. Might be worthwhile just to talk about, is this the right charge?
Okay.
Is it necessary to meet? We were meeting fairly regularly. Now that we've sort of been through that number one on the charge, you can talk and decide whether or not you'd prefer to meet, if there's something to meet about. or, otherwise have a regular standing meeting every couple of months, however you want to do it. I think should be up to the committee.
I have a little, so I was on it as well last year, and I think chairing it last year, if I remember correctly. I have a couple thoughts just to throw out there in terms of thinking about what we need. I know some of it was that, having been a part of creating it, some of that was about looking at a new way to do a budget and getting more visibility and everything. And I do feel like, to some extent, that first part of the charge, almost, I think we've completed. I feel like the way that the zero-based budget that Jared now brings us is so completely clear and transparent, and it is a new process now, that I don't think we need to look at the process and create a new one. So although it was more regular meetings last year, I would think that it doesn't need to be something that happens as regularly now, because I think we've accomplished a lot of what it was created to do. And that it could be more of like Wally said, the numbers 2 and 3, some oversight or updates of existing current year things, and any major changes. But so that's just some perspective to throw out there.
So we can appropriately discuss offline how and when to set our meetings, if we haven't had a meeting.
Yeah, we
Well,
probably should set
Are
the
we
first
re-upping this
meeting.
charge? I mean, what are we doing tonight?
Well, I think that the
Rejuvenating this charge?
purpose was to bring the charge and have all of us look at it and say, okay, what do we really want out of the budget subcommittee now? It did fulfill a lot of what it was created for initially. That doesn't mean there's no role for it now, but I think the charge might be a little different from what it initially was. We might want to revise this charge.
Well, that wasn't clear in this action
Yeah,
item, so I didn't really think about it that way.
Okay.
I see this as a mechanism whereby a smaller subgroup of the school committee can get closer to the budget. For purposes of understanding, interpretation, transferring that knowledge on to new members.
Yeah.
Doing some piece of it that Jared doesn't do, that Lori doesn't do, that I think has value. So people who are well steeped in it may not look at review budget process and say there's a need there. But there's always going to be somebody who's not very, very familiar with it.
Right.
And I think it's our job to constantly keep that rolling forward, even though it might not have the same import that it did a year ago. But we're in year 2 of zero budget, so I think we're going to be asking Jared, what did we learn last year? And I know he's going to have answers for us as he continues to refine the process. And he's already started talking about that. So, I would want to do some of this with or without a school committee, get close to the budget.
Right.
And in year 2,
Yeah.
it's a good year for me to do that. Others might find the same in their year 2.
Or 6, right? Well, yeah, so I think it is the school committee's budget, right? It's our budget, not his budget, so we have to be involved. In our town, the school committee builds the budget with the finance director. There's no handing off of a package, we build it together, so. But the scale is much lower, and I appreciate that that's not practical here. But I think it's more than, I think Jared and the team does a great job, and the numbers show. Your performance this year has been excellent. So this is in no way a critique of what you're doing, but to me, it's not really a zero-based budget. It does look at the prior year's expenditure, and people kind of have to justify. But a zero-based budget is to start with a 0 and rebuild, and that's a different thing, and it's not that practical anyway. So I know we call it a zero-based budget, but I don't really think it is that. So what really, to me, we need to do.
But this is, to me, the subcommittee work.
Well, I'm at a philosophical level, I don't know, but subcommittee we did. I'm just saying, really what we're doing is we're saying, what did you spend last year? And how much do you think you have to spend this year? And talk
I don't think
No,
that's
that
fair.
isn't.
I think it really is zeroing out and building from the bottom.
I haven't seen that so far. I'd be happy to be re-educated, but we sat down, I didn't see that. So I think it's,
Maybe that's our first agenda item is
yeah.
getting everyone on the same page as to
Making it
how-
clear how it's being created.
I don't think it is that though. Do you start with 0 English teachers and build up? I don't think you
Yes,
do
we
that.
did, absolutely.
We looked at it.
We absolutely did. They had to justify absolutely
Well,
everything
okay.
from 0 up,
Okay,
yeah.
then I guess, yeah, walking through that would be, valuable. But at the end, however we get there, because we're gonna get back to the same spot, which is you had 6 English teachers and the demographics say you need 6 English teachers, okay. And they make X, and okay. So I think that when we get done with all that and we sum it all up, we're gonna be getting close to a percentage increase, which is what the towns wanna see. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're gonna present a year that's the first year of a bargaining unit, a new bargaining agreement,
Theoretically,
Right,
Yeah,
assuming
okay.
it comes.
assuming we have no
right?
idea.
So,
Right, assuming it
and
comes in
because
under
salaries
next
is
year.
such a big part of, the equation, there's no practical way to break down that handicapping in a public meeting. It's just not practical.
Not in bargaining
No.
good faith.
Right,
Right.
right.
Now, this budget policy subcommittee is also a public meeting?
Yep.
Yep.
So a big part of the methodology or the algorithm is not gonna be discussable.
Well, I would just come back to the point, that this is not about creating next year's budget. The budget subcommittee was created to look at the process, which was the number 1 on here, of how we're doing that. And then the other 2 items are about the year that we're in. So having, getting another layer of detail about,
But
Current.
we're already in it and we've encumbered it. I mean, we get pretty good level of detail in the warrant review. We get a lot of detail in the warrant.
yeah, we do, and like, as far as, one of the things that you might do is get together and talk about whether or not we still need to do this,
Need to do what?
have this subcommittee.
Have this up.
Well, I wouldn't think if it's current year review, I would say you don't need it. I think, to me, it's about how you plan the following year and then how you sell that to the towns. If we're not doing that, then there's no.
We're doing that, in a different way, and the discussions, once we bring something to the table here, is amongst all of us.
But who's in command of the details on the school committee side?
The chairs.
The chairs.
work with them.
Tend to work more closely with.
Then we don't need a budget subcommittee, in my opinion.
So I would like to have the budget subcommittee meet this month and maybe discuss this a bit. And with the guidance that the full committee and the chairs provided, which is useful. I understand that, we've accomplished a major goal in shifting our budgeting, high-level budgeting process, which requires a lot of low-level work. I get that.
Right.
But to try to meet sometime this month, and can we just do our calendar deciding offline?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
calendar
think,
should be done
I
offline.
would say, so
Well, obviously-
if you wanna take the reins on
Work with the superintendent.
organizing a
and
day at a
director.
time that works,
Yeah.
then that's who's gonna be the last.
But I understand we shouldn't just be meeting monthly, just.
Just to meet,
Right.
no.
I get
Quite
that.
doing it just to meet.
Okay.
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 Next,
Travel.
should we just do you wanna, I think this is probably court, right? You wanna talk
Well,
about
this is, should we just
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think
tee up
Court
where
should.
we are, just kind of a review of where we are and where we left off, that we all agreed the last time we talked about travel and trips, that the goal was to get to final approval of the 13 that already have initial approval. And we agreed that the process for that would be to revise or create, based on a suggestion that you gave us before, a form that could be sent out to trip leaders, that they would fill in with more detail, and that once those came back to us and had more detail, we could use those to then move forward with final approval votes. Accurate summary? Alright, so that's where we left off. We asked Court to lead the charge in working with Lori to help us create this form, and so here it is in front of us, and let's hand it to Court. Do you wanna kind of go
So,
through it and explain
Yeah,
what's in it?
what we did was pretty simple. We took the initial school committee trip approval request form, and looked at it and said, it is what it is, it's an initial request. And we noted that there wasn't a then subsequent request with more detail. So we used the original initial form, modified it to expect teachers to go a little bit deeper when they come to us for final approval. So if we have data coming to us initially that tells a teacher, yes, please continue to do the planning process and flesh this out further, they then do so and come back with more information. The budget would be probably refined by then, minimum maximum numbers would be refined, ratios would be refined, logistics would be refined, but still a work in progress because some of these trips won't happen until 6-7 months from now. One thing that Lori made very clear to us a week ago was she needs to know, I'll put it in my language, not exactly yours, but she needs to know exactly what we are doing so that she knows what she then has to do to fit things together. It was really a more direct request for, give me some guidance, but I translate that to mean she can define what she has to do for educational value, for logistics that makes sense, for access that's reasonable, for safety and so on. All of those pieces that go into managing and overseeing a trip can be done in light of what we have asked and heard initial, what we have asked and heard for final approval. So her work now is to tighten up if she sees it necessary, working with the principal, of course. Is there more to be done on logistical oversight, or are we in good shape? Safety, financial, and follow-up reporting is another piece we haven't talked about, but there should be some simple means whereby principal, then Lori, then school committee hears about the kind of successes that occurred on behalf for teachers and students on these trips. So with all of that, what we don't have on the form explicitly at this point in time is words lifted directly from our policy around educational value. But we are looking for educational value. What we have instead are words that speak to a description of the trip with outcomes, quote unquote, which I think is going to necessarily be educational. Second question posed to teachers, spell out how the trip fits with or meets school district objectives. Again, I think this would be aiming toward school district objectives that are traditional educational ones and ones social as well. And on the social, we also talk about how this trip might relate to identity building, if you will, for the group, and what does it celebrate? And I think we probably would come to quick agreement what that could mean in a social, emotional kind of sense for a strong group experience. The work that is yet to be done is work around whether we have achieved what we want around ensuring that teachers have support and guidance in the inclusion and social equity goals we have, such that people who want to participate in these trips, they're optional, some of them are costly, that we've made a reasonably good effort to make opportunities possible for students without, again, putting it on the responsibility of individual teachers to do best they can. I think if this is important, it becomes a district initiative, and thus I think the school committee over the next few months can look at how we can address that for next year, because initial approvals for next year, 2021, will be in front of us before we know it. So my hope is that this would inform you, Lori, and Principal Mastrullo enough so you know what information has to then be added to all of the considerations, all of the the administrative and management approvals that come from your office, so that you feel confident that what's said here at this high level actually happens in a way that's safe and sound. So that was what was behind this effort to make one form two. And I guess what it says implicitly is that that one form was okay. We could build on it. We didn't have to start from scratch.
Thank you for doing that
Thank you.
work. And so I think what we should do next is any questions or comments on this, and then I would say we'd have a vote to approve it so that we can pass it to the teachers.
Okay.
And, it'll be utilized to come back to us with final approval requests on the 19th.
So I have a bunch of questions, Court. So in this form, I mean, the preliminary and the final are pretty close. So
Yes.
is it your intention that there'll be kind of a gap analysis at the preliminary? I mean, I know now we're sort of compressed, so maybe it's not this time, but is it your idea that, you know, they come at the preliminary and we flag the gap analysis and we sort of give them homework?
Yes, exactly. If somebody were to ask for initial approval, it could be purely conceptual. With, for example, a large gap, a large range for a budget estimate, for example. Might not have specific days, might read February vacation. And with initial approval, then they know that we believe that this has potential educational value, that it equates with the rough budget that we see, and we're empowering that teacher to go ahead and do the planning with some confidence that if the school district objectives are met, we're going to want to approve it.
So, okay, so that, I mean, that sounds right. So it comes up, and is it your intention also the teacher presents it, or
No.
these are presented en masse?
No, I think what I, speaking as one member of this committee, I want confidence that the principal knows this intimately and has communicated it effectively to the superintendent who brings it forward.
Okay, then there were two other components that we discussed. One was training, which you volunteered. So it's silent on that. I mean, we don't have to say there's training, but in the process, as we outlined, as Heather outlined, I thought, my understanding was we would standardize the form, which you did a nice job, thank you. And that there would be a training module that we would make sure is in place before we roll this out of that.
We did, and what I heard and considered reasonable at this point in time was Lori's statement that this enables her now to know exactly what the meetings are going to look like that she has with these teachers. So what I called a training, what boxes do you have to check, what skill sets do you need to bring to bear, how do you manage condition X, Y, or Z. I'm of a mind that that's going to occur in the form of what you refer to as meetings. Whether you draw in other resources, how you do that.
So there won't be a standard training program for all, especially the international trips?
So what we had talked about was, there's gonna be a whole backside to this process, which will run through me and the principal, that really highlights all those level of safety pieces, the communication pieces, the insurance and the vendors, and try to be sure I think we're gonna cover a good amount.
Okay, so you're committing to that for this scholastic year?
Absolutely.
All right, so that answers the third question too, which is insurance.
Yep.
And I'm looking at Aaron's draft minutes, and it says, you know, we revert to the vendors. So, but are we really clear on the crazy code of insurance between the town, the school, the vendors, all that?
We are carrying a supplemental policy as of late last spring as well, that once the trips are finalized and we know how many kids are going where they're going, we submit that to the insurance company, and so we're covering ourselves now as well through a supplemental policy.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I think, can I make a few other comments? Are we moving to vote? Right? So,
Yeah, we're gonna move.
Yeah.
So before we,
Just bear in mind that all we're talking about is this year's, because this whole thing will come back to us for fiscal
Before,
year 20.
Right.
David,
This is
if you
not-
allow me, that's something I don't.
He's not done.
I defer to my colleague.
Yes.
for-
So that's, I wanted actually to ask one single question at this stage. These forms are being considered only for this year.
Correct.
Why do we need an initial one? We already approved all the
Yeah, we
13 initial.
We don't.
This is
Right, so
just,
that's just for reference, all we'll
We're
be
standardizing.
asking them for is the
Okay.
second half, which
Yeah,
is
because
the
that's
final
what I
approval.
wanted. Are we expecting any other trips to come before us?
For this year, for this year.
I expect not. My request to the staff is that everything for this year has come to you.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
That's
So-
what I want to be sure.
all right, so- so
that
We approve this form and it'll be populated largely on the information that's already available. And then next month, we'll look at the final, is that the intention? What's the intention for this year?
My understanding is that on December 5th, Lori, you expect to have the teachers come back or their information come back with a request and a recommendation for
December 3rd.
final approval. And final approval doesn't mean that every T is crossed, every I is dotted. There will be work to be done. For
Right.
example, registration, enrollments are still continuing.
Right.
That could impact ratios and what adult supervision is needed. Vendors are still in communication with these teachers and teachers that are reporting that to Lori and Mike. So,
And is it your intention that we vote all 21 or whatever in a block, or we consider each one, or?
we haven't discussed this. I consider that a very interesting question, actually. And if it doesn't make this a intractable, endless process, I think we actually provide more support and endorsement for trips as an individual. But I
Okay.
worry about the time involved, so
So that's an open question. We
Yeah.
can-
my
I
thought,
would
my
suggest.
thought as chair for the region in these original trips was that we would offer a consent and just read the names off, and anybody who wants to pull one out, specifically, we can pull out, just like a
Perfect, sure.
consent
Yeah,
agenda.
I think that's.
And that would ought to save us a little bit of time, but it'd still give us the opportunity to talk about each one of
I
the
agree,
members.
because that will actually give as well to the record a show that we considered each one of them and pulled out the ones.
And these final, quote unquote, final, I realize are not final, but the populated form of each trip will be given to us in advance to review, right? That's.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know where the right spot is, but I guess this is probably the best one. I just want to reflect my opinion and kind of as guidance into how we proceed. So, and I've thought a lot about it. I've talked to some of the members. So I think that, I think it's a good issue for us to take. And I'm very grateful to you all for raising it, however contentious it might have been, because it's pretty important. And I think that what this taught me, I'd never thought about it. I mean, I never thought about trips really at all. And now I've thought a lot about them. So I think there's three components that have surfaced. One is I would call it, and I don't want to be deprecating, but the more mechanical aspect, right? Are the T's crossed, are the I's dotted? Do you know what you're doing? Do you have the passports? Have we done the right process? And I think Court and the team have done a great job. So I'm good with that. And I think it's fine. My questions are answered. The second one, which you all raised, is the academic merit argument, which is alluded to slightly here. And, personally, I'm okay with the form as is and these trips going forward for the coming year and not really weighing in on that. I'm more broadly less comfortable with the school committee weighing in as an academic, metric. I mean, I think we do employ the superintendent, she employs the staff, we hire teachers, we expect that they will bring valuable experiences of any kind. I mean, art, whatever it is, we don't challenge, well, gee, was that art project really worthwhile? I mean, we don't say that, right? So I think I'm less comfortable with that piece as a second piece, but I defer to, others in the committee. And I mean on an ongoing basis, I don't mean for this current year. But the final one is really troubling to me, and that's been raised through you all a little bit, but also the letter we got, which is the equity piece. and the walk the talk piece, because we talk a lot about how we're welcoming, how we're teaching our kids, equity issues and how we engage at METCO students and stuff. And yet, these particularly international trips, the expensive ones, I think are often, populated by people who have the ability to pay. And so, so that sits there. And I think, although we got added through a policy thing, it's not fair. As a member of the policy committee, I don't feel it's fair for the policy committee to start making policy till the philosophy is set from the full committee. And I think that last piece about where are we with trips, and again, I don't mean this year, because I'm prepared to say they're all good, just go do it. But the coming years, especially starting with next year, and you mentioned, Lori, that we're looking for direction. I think that we really need to tackle on what basis do we set trips, and then whom do we allow in? And I think that the economics of, and everybody agrees, I think that culturally and educationally, international travel is a great thing for the kids, for anybody, but particularly young minds should be exposed to it. But that comes with a price, and I don't think the scholarship fund, even as laudable as it is it's a drop in the bucket to the cost and the potential needs. So it brings up a budgetary piece. I mean, maybe that's something that actually has to be out of the school operating budget, the scholarship fund. That's one issue. And secondly, I think it's not fair to the teachers to say, well, you have to do bake sales and you have to do car washes, because again, it's good for the kids to be engaged in it, and we shouldn't discourage that piece of it. But the big funding of it can't come from teachers, and we can't have teachers competing for fundraising. I mean, it has to be at the administrative level. So there's that second piece. And then the third piece, which unfortunately dovetails back into the educational piece, even though I said I'm not comfortable with it, is if you're gonna go internationally and you wanna study X, we have to challenge ourselves. Well, do we really have to go internationally? Maybe we can take a bus trip somewhere. Maybe it's not as good. Maybe the White Mountains don't offer the same, geological experience as Banff and the Rockies, the Canadian Rockies. But you know what? If it's $1,000 instead of $3,000, how much more affordable does that make it, and how much more broadly can we offer that to people? So, unfortunately, economics often drives lots of decisions, and I mean, the statement I'm making really is to say, I'm fine with this form and this process and the trips going forward. I don't even personally feel the need to review them in December. Just knowing that you're doing it is good for me. But you have to tell us when we have to start tackling that issue for 2021. And I think that's probably pretty soon, because so that may be what I'd rather see for December meeting is, what I'm saying and however people think about it, that's what we got to tackle philosophically, because we've got to give direction to the palette of trips that are coming up. And I don't think, personally, that business as usual is gonna, I wouldn't vote for it. If we haven't had that discussion and really framed where these international trips sit in not just the educational experience, but the equity experience.
Can we just clarify? I think my understanding coming out of the last meetings is that's our plan without a doubt. So I
haven't heard that.
Absolutely. That was my understanding from our meetings going forward. In fact, in our last chair's meeting with the superintendent to plan agendas, we were looking at when we're going to start that discussion. So I don't think there isn't a question of are we going to discuss how to do it going forward.
It wasn't clear to me.
Oh, okay. So let's make sure it's clear to everybody that this is for this year's trips. And for going forward, we are going to have a full discussion about all the things that you just talked about, but then that's why we don't need to tonight.
Well, I didn't want to have it tonight. I just didn't want to pass the form and make sure people know it.
So
Absolutely, it's on the agenda.
So what, unless there's any strong objection to this, Court has offered to continue this process to sort of take us from here, having listened to everything we've talked about over the last month, to consider some options in adjusting this and addressing placeholders that will allow us to then have a discussion about some of these things that I think there are differences of opinion on the committee. that are gonna be worthwhile having a conversation. But I think it will help frame that conversation with some extra information, because I think the goal is, Court, do that, pass it to you for some input and feedback and consideration, come back, and then we get something in time that we can think about that prior to meeting, to have a conversation about these things specifically going forward, and carve ourselves out enough time to do that. I don't think it'll be the 5th, because we still will not have final, I think that's the day we do final approval for the budget, isn't it? Or is it the next meeting?
We have
Budget hearing.
budgets and warrant articles to finalize everything.
So it likely won't be that meeting. We will approve the fiscal year 20 trips.
Yeah.
And if Court has a report for us at that point, great. I think we put that so we can, dedicate some time to it, because clearly it's an issue we all want to weigh in on and come to some conclusions about how to do some of this, both for fiscal year 21 and going forward. And so that's the thought process. Whether that's a late December meeting or an early January meeting is just going to depend on where we are with the
Okay,
budget.
but I flagged an issue, in my mind at least, that if equity gets us to a place where a significant subsidy needs to be made available, that's a budgetary impact, as I understand it, for 2021. So should we, and I realize that we don't have forever time on this, but should we give guidance to the administration to put a placeholder block of money in the budget for potentially trip subsidies if we're planning to move out on 2021 trips? Because if we run into no money and we don't have an equity resolution on that, I wouldn't be in favor of it.
I think that's a challenging issue. I've given some thought to it. I think that ultimately the way we devise our approach to the equity issue will probably force a return to the policy to make some adjustments. But I think that the issue around how we do that is a big enough one that it's going to be very hard for us to come up with something. I'm not in favor of changing this year's budget to reflect an addition to the budget of that. I think we need more consideration, more.
When we say this year, I want to be clear, we're talking about
I'm talking about
2021.
fiscal year
Right.
21.
Right.
Yep.
The one that we're working on, yeah.
So I think, the way that I would recommend we proceed is that we proceed to change our current policy to reflect a practice we want and the law, and that drives the policy. And that will be reflected in what we come back and give out to teachers for FY21. And that and I think we really need some discussion around how we're going to proceed with the equity issue, the financial equity issue. I'm not prepared to propose that we put that in the budget, because I don't know that it should be a budgetary item. These are not school required trips. They are opt-in trips, and we may get to that point, but I think we need to look at a lot of other models for the process and determine if there is one that makes more sense for our district than that. Because I'll tell you what's likely to happen 4 years from now, when we've got a tight budget and we're looking at the list of things that are going to get cut. And there's library staff, and there's teachers, and there's athletics, and there's the trip fund. I think I know where the money's coming from. And that's not fair to the process unless we have exhausted other opportunities and we have then come to the conclusion we're gonna do that, and I think if we were to do that, we'd have to do something that would, commit those funds on an ongoing basis, whether it's a lump sum or whatever it might be. Otherwise, we aren't solving the problem. We're creating other problems down the road. So I do think it's gonna take sort of a two-step piece there.
I think Lori has it.
Yeah, I think we're gonna wanna do some research, right, because we can fund curriculum-based ones where we're funding every child. I don't know, we're pretty sure we can't, don't think we can fund an optional
Legally, it
subsidy.
would say every kid gets to go on this trip for free.
But, I mean,
Like you're opening up a
you know,
huge can
we
of
may be
worms.
opening a can of worms, but the teachers who go, these are Q5 trips I'm speaking with largely.
Yeah.
But on vacation, whatever, the public funds are paying their salaries. I mean, we're already actually subsidizing those trips. So I think I agree with you, it's a thorny issue, but it's not one we can kick down the road. I believe that we are already publicly subsidizing the trips for those who can afford to go. So we've already created an inequity and we have to address it. Now, I'm not saying we have to address it in the way I proposed, but I'm saying what you propose is also not practical. That's my point.
I want to suggest that we bring in front of the committee best practice information from a half dozen other high-achieving school districts that have had these exact debates that we have and have moved a little further down the road.
I mean,
think
they're
that-
struggling like we are.
They
having
are,
surveyed them.
but they're not struggling with the individual teachers
Mhm.
doing whatever they do. Instead, it's become a district responsibility.
You know
So
that.
I think that information would
Yeah.
greatly inform any other conversations about anything, policy, budget, anything, because we can move this forward with the shared sentiment that I think is already clear, which is that we want to see that these trips are of high value to a lot of kids who want to participate at costs that don't deny too many kids.
Right.
Extracurricular, optional, fee-based trips are always going to have a cost factor for my family, for your family, for every family.
Yeah, I never meant to suggest it was
No, I know.
fee-free.
No, I understand that. But I know that there are other districts who would claim they've done a better job to mitigate some of these problems than we have yet, and they'd be delighted we're trying, and they want to share with us what they're doing.
Can I just say that we definitely should move forward and approve these trips, because right now we are actually raising a fee on all of our students, as I did a little research on how these trips are put together by those companies and what they do. The sooner they know about how many students you're going, and they have a declaration that you are going with a company, they actually start looking at the biggest portion of the cost, which is the airline tickets. When those airline tickets in big amounts go on sale, they grab those tickets, and this is your savings. That's why you'll see $3,000 to $4,000 the price tag. So the more time we take, the longer they have to wait, that price is going up. So we are not helping equity at this point. We also are pushing our teachers. We're not necessarily setting the example that, okay, we're going to trust you, so you can take some chances. No, we're not by doing, okay, I want to see this, I want to see that, by, asking for a ton of information. I think these forms are great. We are not giving them too much of feeling that they can take some chances and maybe look outside of the catalogs for education companies that cater to schools, because you always pay the premium for situations where it's harder, these are harder requirements, more paperwork, more headache for those companies, the prices are always higher. So as a committee, I feel like we should work on passing those trips as soon as possible, not creating too much headache, and being very clear, as a matter of fact, what are the district goals we are looking for, maybe putting that underneath, so there's no ambiguity. And then going forward, I know that we have done that in Carlisle, we have looked at the trips year prior, so that the principal could come and present it at the beginning of the year to the parents and the school committee, which means that you have so much more time to seek public input, talk to parents. Parents can start planning, and maybe having and definitely we can talk about this in another setting. Having more information at the beginning of the school year. Our kids do not have to go every year on a trip. Teaching them some fiscal responsibility is not a bad thing. Fundraising, there's crowdfunding websites. There's part-time job, and it's really up to the kids whether they want to participate. And often it will not be the cost that prevents the children of participating in a school trip. The school trip an 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. is highly popular in all kids because it's the whole class going as a graduation trip. So everyone wants to go.
Still, there are many families that opt out.
There are some families that opt out, but you know what? I also know, being a scout leader, Girl Scout leader, there are many, many kids that will not go on trips because they are not comfortable sleeping away from the home. So there are many, many reasons, I argue, that people do not necessarily participate. For whatever reason, they don't go. I definitely agree we should look at the equity piece and how to help families, afford the trips. But I definitely, getting this done definitely before next year will be very helpful. And moving those things forward will be helpful to the process as well.
Thank you.
So I was just trying to go see where we're going with this. So primary thing we're trying to do tonight is approve the form.
Yep.
When does Dr. Hunter think that the trips will be coming to us for final approval?
December 3rd.
Okay. And so we can have that.
But to Eva's point, if we approve them tonight, could they save more money?
Well, we didn't have it on the agenda, so we cannot do that, in my opinion. And then the final piece is trying to set some meeting, either the second meeting in December or the first meeting in January. Does that sound like a ballpark?
I think depending on the
Yeah,
budget.
we've been looking at
Direction,
what's
but-
falling into the agendas of the next several meetings,
Right.
and it's somewhere in there, December or January, maybe January, depending on the budget and warrant article stuff.
So I'm gonna make a motion that we approve this form tonight. And then we have our other discussions about approving the trips and then what we're gonna do for 2021 at that meeting. That's not all one motion. The motion was to approve the form, so I guess it's.
For both.
Is that for both committees?
Is it for both? Yes.
Yes, because
well-
one of the trips is a
Yeah,
middle school trip,
for
so
both.
we need it for both committees, okay, thank you.
Um,
Is there a second for that motion?
I think you all should be able to speak.
Well, he can,
Then
we
we-
will.
Then we'll ask for
Let's call the
discussion.
question.
Can we have a second?
Is there a second for that motion to approve these forms?
Second,
Okay.
For
Yuval, is that for both committees?
for both, thank you.
Thank you. Yuval,
So discussion.
discussion.
So, with all due respect, before I discuss the form, I wanted actually to say something about what David said before. I'm totally okay with everything that was said, because everybody, at the end of the day, we all said the same. The only thing was David's idea about the financial part. I think it all falls into the three things that we have to discuss in the big picture, and that's amount of intervention, philosophy that we want to convey, the equitability part, and then the policy. So we'll all get there. I think that David's idea about budget within I didn't find it in any other districts. So all other districts that I found, they had many interesting mechanisms, but budget line was never one of them actually. That doesn't mean that the process that we have now, even with the little money that we have now, the idea that we don't have a centralized person that decides on who gets it, and a process, and a transparent process is an okay situation, even with the little that we have now, because Principal Mastrullo found money to, it's not a budget line, but Principal Mastrullo found more than $5,000 last year to give. So we need to understand where does it come from, and we need to have, maybe even now for this year, maybe, I'm not saying,
Going to each of them and know
that
exactly
instead
what's
of going
going on.
to a teacher, there be somebody centralized.
I think
That's all part of our, that's
that will
a big
take-
conversation.
Yeah,
No,
we're-
no, no, I am saying even for this year, just to check instead of going to a teacher, there'll be a centralized person that.
That's gonna be me right about
That's-
now.
Well, because you don't have enough to do.
Well,
So,
Okay,
It's gonna
so
be
I'm finished.
okay, thank you.
And now about the four. The only thing I would like, because there is any additional information or comments, I'm afraid of what David said and what Eva said, that we don't need to check and we have to approve. We have to actually, we need to at least show that we have to check it according to what we get and not, both for the legal requirement and any additional information or comments. I suggested, and I suggest to the administration to instruct teachers that if their trips have got some things that are not, that are special consideration for that specific trip, we will have a little more information there. For instance, if it's a rock climbing, we want to understand, the double waivers and that the people that are doing it are. Same if there is country risks or things like this. That's
Yeah, and I think, we are not looking for brevity necessarily. If a sponsor of one of these trips wants to write a 4-page description of what they're doing, then we'd be more than happy to take it in. But this is sort of baseline.
Right.
And I think where
things.
I'm comfortable leaving it to the superintendent on, if, as you're getting these, there's that sort of concern that you go back and say, what are we gonna,
yeah, I think
Yeah,
when
so that-
Court and I met, we tried to at least flag that for the teachers so that under the itinerary, they need to note any of that kind of risk.
It calls it out, provide a day-to-day expected itinerary, it can only be expected at this point. Locations, activities, accommodations, modes of travel, anticipated risks. So we're trying to help teachers understand how we're thinking, how Lori's thinking, how Mike Mastrullo's thinking.
so I would just like to thank Court again
Yes.
and thank everybody, thank Evolve for engaging this process. I do think we're gonna have a tighter package without raising the bar too high for this year's trips, and I am confident that the committee and the administration will come up with a better approach for fiscal year 21 and beyond, and there's some thorny issues in there that, I'm sure we will do our best to do something that works for Concord and Carlisle. Any other comments before we vote? All in favor for the read?
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed, just to make sure?
No.
All in favor for Concord?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, next
So,
step done.
Um,
Can I just make sure, before we go on to the next thing, I just wanna make double clear, because several times we've left this meeting without giving Dr. Hunter clear direction and next steps. Have we given you enough, everything that you need in order to move forward?
I believe
With
so.
this form,
I guess
okay.
we'll find out on the 3rd.
Okay.
But I believe so.
Okay,
So, Dr. Hunter, when's our meeting? 5th?
December
December
So
3rd.
we'll have the forms well enough in advance to review. them.
Friday before is part of the
Okay.
packet. I'll try, but
Well,
I
and
got
they
it.
know that, they know that deadline.
they don't know everything, because I
Okay.
haven't been clear.
Well, they will know, I
They're
guess.
gonna
And
know.
they-
Now that we've
Tomorrow.
approved
Well,
it,
they run the
communicate.
risk that we
It
get a
will-
no decision on.
You will
before
have them
we go
within the
forward.
packet, which we aim to post Friday before. I'll know more how tightly I can
You
turn
know,
it
on
around.
a specific
tomorrow.
trip, if there'll be missing things, we can always ask it for 2 weeks later.
I mean, right, they run the risk of delay if we don't have the information in time, right?
All right, yeah,
That's all.
let me work it.
Exactly.
Okay,
Okay,
um,
thank you.
so next item on the agenda, is really, just an update. There's been some discussion between superintendent and town manager, and, I had a conversation with the chair of the FinCom, and, we're looking for, some kind of mechanism that allows this to happen without being overly impactful to, the overall school budget, CPS and the region. So we'll be back. We're, I think kind of where we are right now is we can show that we're working on this. We will have a mechanism to take care of the identified expenses in the memo from last week. It's unlikely that we will be doing anything for fiscal year 21 related to rent and this sort of thing. If we're gonna go down this path, we need something that doesn't create sort of just like we talked about with, challenges down the road about, okay, what's gonna get cut out of a tough budget. And then we've made sure we've thought about everything that needs to be done and hopefully can find a way to do it as simply as possible. So that's kind of where we are on that. Warrant article.
So where we left off last week was, I think we did the history, got to a place where everyone was on the same page. The discussion on the table continues to be what, if any, warrant articles and how many.
Yep.
Jared did reach out, we ended up looping back to Gail, who did the feasibility work a year ago. Mostly because we needed a timely answer in the DPW. If you drive around town, you can see they're straight out, so we were having a hard time reaching
Working on
the
roads.
So we reached out to Gail instead, so we can give you an update on that, and then I think it's just further discussion and any direction you need to give us on more information you need to make the decision in time for the warrant deadlines. So first we'll give you the update.
So I spoke to Gail, and the area we're talking about right now is the road in front of the BD Center. So currently there's about 7 parking spots on the left and the fire lane, and then 7 parking spots on the right.
Is this the picture that you sent around?
Yeah, I forwarded
Oh, you did?
what you sent me,
Oh,
I
okay.
sent to them.
Good. So what we talked about is, could we potentially add more spots without any construction? That is not possible. What they did say potentially is you could add spots and make them, right now they're parallel, so make them perpendicular. And but you would have to extend about 10 feet in towards the BD Center, extend the road 10 feet, which would cut into potential impervious
Still maintaining
surface.
a two-way?
That would
Okay.
still actually maintain the two-way. And what that would do is that would get you maybe 30 to 40 spots.
So that's in the grassy area between the BD parking lot and the road itself?
Correct. And you'd have to go in about 10 feet.
On both sides?
Yeah.
So if it's,
So that's better than doing it on the other side.
Well, that's what they recommended.
But potentially you could do it on both sides?
Well, they recommended that the side that the BD is on, then going into the berm side.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're all really hesitant to
touch.
expect we're gonna get permission to do anything on the berm side, so they're, actually, this is a
That's
really
an
quick answer,
environmental
that,
issue.
yeah, it's very highly regulated.
Altogether, with all due respect, I think this is not a solution, because to do this, we have to do it while we do the road. So we have to once again go with a warrant article of the road.
Yeah, we were just trying to provide information on the
Yeah.
question asked of
Yeah.
us.
And that will not be a
We
full
didn't recommend
solution, it will be expensive.
We would have to
and
do
it
the
will
road.
not fly in color. So I think that we,
Probably.
so I think we should go back to our.
Yeah, no, it was
can I just ask
purely
a
meant to be
question though?
an
No,
equal.
I think it's useful to have as backup. To some extent, if we go for our parking plan and it fails again for some reason, I think we need to know this information
Yeah.
as a backup plan. So I think it's very helpful to have. I had a question, so we're talking about extending or widening into the BD side of it.
No.
That's what he's.
Yeah.
That's what Jared's saying, widening on the BD side. So if that's the case, would it not affect impervious surface as much because that's already,
It would.
oh, it would?
Yeah.
It's grass.
Oh,
You
there's
gotta-
grass
you're
before
gonna
the
have to put a
walkways.
walkway where the.
You're gonna-
It's not as environmentally
Okay.
sensitive on that side, is that the theory?
Compared to the berm where the water is draining, it
And
isn't.
how about,
Okay.
how about on the other side of the BD parking lot, what's that, that grassy and tree area, what's that?
Oh, down the hill.
I don't know, I can't tell
Yeah.
elevation here.
Is that the
Yeah.
problem?
Oh, that's a steep
Jerry?
hill.
This year.
Jared,
Oh, that's a steep hill, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't.
Sure.
I thought you were this grass down here, closer to the road.
Sorry, are you sure that they're speaking about doing it on the BD side of the road?
I know.
I would just want to mention to maybe bring up in this conversation the fact that there is no charging stations for the cars. Last Saturday, there was a big event presenting cars and possibly, putting that idea in parents' heads, buy zero emission car for your child if you're planning. But first thought that came to my mind was, who would buy a car where you cannot charge it in the place that the car spends the most time? So if Concord is pushing that idea and is looking to expand electrical vehicles, that should be a consideration as well.
That's
So, kind of moving on to
Gail's proposal.
the conversation we
It's
need
in the
to-
plan from last year.
Yeah.
Charging station.
So
Um,
I'm gonna be in the minority, I'm sure, but,
Can I just tee this up?
Yeah.
It seemed to me last week that we were pretty much in alignment, that we were thinking a warrant article for a parking lot in the same place we proposed a parking lot last year. And some of the discussion now is, are there things that we've learned in the past year that would be beneficial to add to the scope of that, and chargers would be one of those things.
Chargers are in the scope of the just
Oh, they were in it last year?
Yeah.
So with that said, I think let's talk about a warrant article to build a parking lot.
Right.
It's gone, in the same spot as last year,
so we're actually.
south side of
Yeah.
the campus.
One number I'd like to have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Susan.
I am of an opinion that moving it's really the same article as last year would be a mistake, because I was part of many of these conversations. And I think we're gonna come back, we really can have useful conversations about things we can do that would make people support this. Because they were saying, have you explored everything? And we really haven't done that much exploration.
I don't think that's true.
Since this last town
I think
meeting,
we've continued to look for ways to,
not as a committee we haven't.
no, but I think we've continued to look for ways to
Right,
ameliorate the
but I'm
parking
just saying,
lot.
maybe we should take a year off and let Lori's Sustainability Committee do its work, which I think they really are just getting some traction at the high school. And getting students, families, administrators more tied in to the climate crisis and things that they can do. And one thing is taking the bus and figuring out ways. I know we don't want to support carpooling as a initiative, because it has many downsides for the committee and administration. But I think it's gonna be much more difficult to have a conversation by saying, well, we're gonna do this pretty much the same thing as we did last year, and that's just.
I don't think that we did the same as last year. I think that at the end of the day, last year was a bundle that was A, very, very expensive, and B, some of the objection was to the parking and some of the objection was to the road and
Most of
other.
Concord was the parking.
And yeah, but we're not alone.
There was one article.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think that I wish that there would have been, I think all the alternatives are something that we all believe in. We would hope that our kids will not need to drive to school. But I think that at the end of the day, the practicalities and the reality is that they will. And that there is a lot of interest, even if it's not from us, in the parents' community, that the kids will, as I said last time, will drive to school. So unfortunately, I don't see that waiting a year will actually bring any solution. I think that we should try within the solution of building the parking lot. We should find as many possibilities to mitigate this as possible, be it charging stations, being a special treatment of specific, of smaller cars or hybrid, I don't know. I think that we should aim at finding solution with the sustainability committee and other sustainability groups within the solution of the parking lots. Because at the end of the day, I think that reality will teach that that's what will work.
Any other input?
So if I hear you correctly, the need for that parking lot is proven, and so the question becomes, how do we do it in the best way possible?
I think so. Actually, I think so. At the end of the day, even when we spoke last year about the mission and stuff, at the end of the day, when parents will drive the school, they'll be double driving because they bring them to school, they go back, and then they go to pick them up from school. At the end of the day, not having it does not having the parking lot does not really bring better emission control than.
So the kids are all mostly driving to school. This has been this way, I mean, Court, correct me if I'm wrong, that Laurel Street has been filled up since 2 years before my kids started going to high school. And that was in 2012 or something. So, I know there's this perception we did lose parking, maybe a little bit, or the school population's maybe declining a little bit, but I'm not saying we will never build more parking. I'm thinking maybe less, maybe we could stripe differently, maybe we would try some other alternatives, maybe we could try the BD Center again. I know that was a disaster. But I feel like there's just some little bit more thinking outside the box that we could do. But,
My sense is that it's going to be a different job for advocacy in Carlisle than in Concord.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly the same. I do think, in spite of work that's been done, it's got to be more visible, to your point about what has been done to look creatively at what we've got,
right.
Including practices,
right.
Including our practices. Question I have about this photo that we received, we see 14 spots that are new, but then we have others budgeted along this ring road as well. What do we have total there? Do we have a rough number for that? I'm sorry, I don't want to put anybody
Yes,
on the
we
spot.
added those.
Sorry.
Yeah, they weren't assigned spots until a year ago, so I think we picked up about 50 spots when we did that.
So we're a net plus 50 from a year ago.
Right.
Okay.
Well, they were already being
They were
used by
being
kids, it was
used.
first come, first
Okay.
served.
Exactly.
Just organized.
But
You just numbered,
but
you
my
just
point is we-
numbered.
Yeah, that they were,
My
yeah.
point is we can use the number now because
Right.
prior to that, they were in the Laurel Street bunch, so
Right.
to speak.
Mhm.
They weren't in our
They weren't allowed to
formal
park there
numbers.
prior?
They were allowed to park, it was first come, first served, so now they're assigned
Okay.
spots.
So the
But
kids
it's
are
no
waking up
different.
super
It's the
early.
same.
I mean, to me, it's different than Laurel Street because it's on the campus, but.
No, no,
It's
besides-
no net increase in parking, it's
No.
just different people that need to
Right.
park.
We
Right.
just assigned it.
So we have a different allocation
Yeah.
that we can talk about. Okay.
If you went to 100% angled in parking, the entire road, A, could you do it, and B,
Yeah,
So you need 16 feet for travel way.
right.
So you'd have to widen the roads.
right?
Yeah.
And then as Yuval points out, you got kids backing out into
That was another
Creative.
concern actually.
That's probably not the smartest thing for young
The
drivers.
Does the police weigh on it? Do they actually tell us what the current situation with people driving, student driving and parking all over the center of Concord? Do we have something that we can
Yeah, we-
actually, or ask the police to weigh on
Yeah, I'm very nervous sometimes, anytime they could tell us they can't park on Laurel Street, and then we're gonna have a really
Are
big problem.
residents clamoring for,
They aren't.
residents only parking or something?
They aren't, so I think we
Yet, but
Nice.
careful.
be glad for that, yeah.
So I was just waiting, really, I think that what Cynthia said is very important about not just coming back with the same thing or looking like we're coming back with the same thing. I do think it's a matter of weighing priorities. I think if we weren't feeling the stress around this as such a major issue among kids, I would probably lean towards saying, yes, let's give it a year, let's really do other things to come back.
Mhm.
However, when I weigh those against each other, I feel like the level of stress that we're dealing with in the students at the high school is higher priority than the than the potential of waiting a year to come back with something different. So I would weigh in at doing it this year. And to address your point, really being focused on how we're communicating all that we have done and all that we are doing differently. Because I think, to Yuval's point, and I agree with him, we're not coming back with the same thing. I mean, the obvious, we're gonna split it from the road, which we've talked about. But I think there are other things that the administration has tried, and so we need to be very clear, if we're going to ask for this, in how we communicate what has been done since then, and why we're where we are. So I think it's about communication.
And maybe not take it for granted, like this committee did an amazing job with bringing the Concord Middle School to the community with explanations, with sessions. Maybe we should not take it for granted and actually be proactive about communicating.
Well, they were
Oh, we
last
did
year.
that.
We did that last year too, but.
Yes, but we had a,
There's just more people that were interested in coming to the middle school, so
Yeah.
there's more of it.
no, but I'm saying last year we came with a much bigger project and today we can
It
actually
was a bigger ask,
concentrate
yeah.
on a specific problem and not.
Eva, did you have any input?
What was the engagement of high school families at the last go?
We had a number of sessions at the high school. We actually went out and tried to socialize the issue with some committees in town, to limited success. But we had I think we had a forum in Carlisle on this topic. And yeah, so it was, I mean, it was it overshadowed by the middle school? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's part of it. It was overshadowed by the middle school.
And, you know, is that a different dynamic this year? Yeah.
I find the most difficult part of this entire debate as follows. When we look at that high school and those students as a student body, we want to make the argument, let's be more sustainable, let's occupy more buses, let's reduce our carbon footprint. And that's well and good, but then as soon as we start talking with individual families, we realize again and again and again, this was my epiphany, is, well, now I understand why it won't work for you, and 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 they have very, very legitimate cases. So we have this very difficult dilemma of long-term town and school objectives, global objectives, and very immediate needs to serve kids who have lives that they have to live. So this is what we're wrestling with, unfortunately, and it's never going to be comfortable because we've got that kind of argument.
And really, we have to remember that we live, as opposed to many other districts, we do have our service of our school bus, but they are very restricted in hours and in routes. And we do remember that.
We've got one of the best bus services.
But still, you know, if somebody needs to get to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:15, there's no bus that takes it most days. So, at the end, we have to remember we don't have public transportation.
That's right.
You know, it's not an option. Many other districts, there is always the option of taking a bus or taking a train. We don't have it.
Well, the town is working on that. At least
But
the
we
town-
don't have it.
No, we don't.
And it's not gonna extend into the neighborhoods the way that
No.
we would need it to. I'm gonna sound like a broken record. I do think we need to bring it back. I think that this is, I think it's incumbent upon us as a committee to fight for this. It's the single thing we can do to have real effect on stress levels at the high school. I think you can make an argument that we are reducing emissions with it because it's going to allow some people who would take 2 trips a day to get their kids to and from school will be one. I find it really interesting that, you know, we are talking about a sector of the population who is going to be dramatically affected by climate change. I don't think they need to be instructed a whole lot more about the seriousness of it. And we are trying to impose restrictions on them that we would not impose on ourselves as adults. I think there are plenty of places that we can look for opportunities to reduce emissions in Concord that affect everybody. And I don't think it's an appropriate, I'm the biggest environmentalist there
understand.
is. That's what my
So
livelihood comes from.
are we taking a vote tonight or no?
So I think it's important that we move forward with this. I think it being a singular issue for a capital article relative to the things we're gonna put out there other than the budget and the town manager's borrowing. I think this is a perfect time, and oftentimes when something comes back a second time, one, people have had an opportunity to think about it more. They will have heard why we think it's important more. And it's showing the importance that we put on it as elected representatives of the community. That, this is important, and it's, so.
I understand. I assume we need to get a warrant article at our
Well, I
next
think,
meeting.
I don't think we need to vote on anything as
Right.
much as we need to just ask,
Yeah, I think our
Direction
next step is
administration to
to
give us-
move back, we're gonna move back with DPW and Gale and tighten the number up with a year's update to it, which I'm a little worried is gonna give us sticker shock given what we've heard from them on exponential increases, but I think that's our next step.
Yeah.
And then we can put warrant language, at least draft warrant language for
Do
our
we have
next
to-
meeting.
Do we have to incorporate into, because we need the number, all kind of other solutions like the charging stations and stuff into this warrant article?
So we can, if you look at the Gale report, it outlines exactly what's embedded in the number, so we'll double back on that.
It included those already.
Yeah, maybe we want to do more. Do we, last time you actually asked us not to start similar conversations with sustainability people. Do we agree on a task force within our committee to speak to the different stakeholders and try to come with?
Well,
I think we
let's
need to
be
I think we
careful
need an
to-
article first,
Yes.
and then we need to
We
discuss how usually what we do in those situations is we have an article or we know what we're gonna propose, we might not have the article yet. In this case, we've got some legwork to do. Unfortunately, one of the things that's gonna be different about this from last year is it could cost more. So we need to get a beat on what that number looks like. And then I would suggest that when we get that back in a proposed article that we agree upon, we can at that point talk about what we want to do as far as outreach goes. And, somebody's gonna have to take the bull by the horns and create a schedule of outreach, and we will talk about strategy at that point on
But it,
outreach to committees and that kind of stuff.
can I ask a procedural question, because I think it's pretty clear from my training, that technical, best practice and really the way committees should proceed is that the chair is the only person that should speak for the committee. You can go out and speak as an individual, but you have to be very clear you're not representing the committee. So I think that I usually try to adhere to that.
In terms of speaking to whom?
Outside public bodies.
Oh,
I'm going
other
to say-
groups.
No, I mean, I disagree. I think if we coalesce around a strategy, we should all be envoys to talk it up.
Not only this,
So I
but
think
the
there are
chair can
stages,
actually-
if I can-
Can I jump in here? I think what you're saying is correct, in the sense that you can't go speak for the committee without being appointed by the committee to do so. By creating an approach, we have designated people to go talk
Yep.
on behalf of the committee for things. I mean,
Right, 'cause
you
they-
go back and look at
here's
the
our
schedule.
Copies and, right.
I quiver every time I look at the schedule we had last year for outreach.
Right.
And everybody was involved, but we approved that.
Yeah, we do.
So, I do think, one, we gotta know what we're talking about, and we
Yeah.
don't know yet.
Mhm.
Two, we need to come to some decision about how we're gonna
Right.
approach this, somebody needs to spearhead it, just from an organizational standpoint.
Yeah.
We need to create a presentation, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this,
Yes,
prior to going out and talking to anybody.
Yes,
yes.
once we have a consistent
So-
message, then we can each go out and talk, but
So-
not until then.
It's obvious that we are going down this road, it's taped, certainly okay to say, we're headed, we haven't voted to a warrant article yet, so we can't say we're bringing one.
Right.
But, we've discussed it and seems to be headed down that road. But I would refrain from any strategic outreach until we've had those discussions.
Is there something short of strategic outreach in the form of engaging known stakeholder groups in a conversation about the drafting of a warrant article?
I would
think
point
that
out,
was,
Doug-
I think that was actually a more eloquent way to put my question.
Your
before. Yes.
So Lori is also already in touch with many of these groups. And having ongoing conversations. I know you're on I don't remember what it's called, but you have a sustainability committee and you go to,
Well, there's representatives from almost every group in town.
Right.
Meet in that group, plus now it's gotten even wider with the middle school project, so there's a lot of school community connections going on right now. One of the goals that we've talked on is the transportation discussion, so our first step for this year, which I will push right along, so we have the data, is to survey the kids and families as to how they're getting to school and why. I think we need that number for everybody, but then to highlight the upperclassmen who are eligible to drive and better understand what their world is like too. Because really what my thinking over the summer through all of the parking discussions has been, I think we're throwing Band-Aids at something without really understanding the root cause. And I think that's why we're not gonna get much movement until we better understand why kids aren't, what's driving, no pun intended, what's driving what. Because right now, trying to throw Band-Aids at things, I think you can put chargers in all over the place, and I'm not sure how many, you might get a random few who do that, but I don't know that we know enough to know what incentive that would be. So I feel like we're missing some information. So I'll move that right along. I
so
think,
to answer your question though, in terms of early engagement, I think it is happening to some extent. Lori's already engaging with a bunch of these groups and we don't wanna not just step on toes, but kind of derail existing conversations.
and it was a mixed, I'll be honest, there was a wide range of opinion among different members within different groups. I had we talked on the parking through the Sustainable Committee last year, and then I went to a couple of different organizations and their meetings, and there were some people who kind of surprised me and were supportive because they remembered their kids' experience and that there was a reality. And then there were others that were just very passionate about their beliefs and that we were promoting the wrong thing. So absolutely we need to reach out and engage with them, and I guess I would hesitate to do that until you've got a warrant article in your hand. They won't be surprised, they've been part of the discussion from here.
I think that without any doubt, time at least dictates that we will move on immediately and have the warrant article and vote on it and move it on. But I think that at one stage, we as a committee will have to try and engage ourselves in a conversation of what we can offer as a.
Yes,
Oh, yeah,
I
well,
think
yeah,
that's true. Once we have a little more knowledge and information to do that.
As well, because I think all of us around this table believe that we should send a clear message about sustainability.
Yeah, and typically, the way that we, almost since I've been doing this, I've always done this, is when we have a warrant article that requires outreach, and, that's really all of our warrant articles, including school budgets, which we do outreach on those too, which is another piece. Town meeting is almost in May this year, so we've got more time than we've experienced in the past. Not that we should lollygag, but once we've got an understanding of what it is we're doing, we'll still have time to put our plan together. So I think we're in good shape on this. Again, I think we've just given them the go ahead to bring us something, and I'd say we can move on unless anybody else.
Superintendent, quick question. So when are you going to do this thing about approaching the juniors and
Survey.
So I left, that's on my to-do list immediately. So I tried to get it done last week and I didn't, so we need to get that out.
just as an idea, if you can try and add a couple of questions that will lead to an information about the possibility of students opting out from driving 1 day a week. It's a solution that is being adopted in many, many countries in the world, in town centers, in city centers, limiting, people actually have, the license limit them from driving 1 day a week into the middle of the city.
Oh, and then you'd have rotating use of spots somehow.
That's another solution how to solve it. It's not, yeah, but
Interesting.
but it's
Interesting
it's something that is being used all over the world
With
in
public
many.
transportation, like you say.
It increases spots by 20%, is basically what it
It's
Yeah.
interesting. It's
Yeah,
interesting
very
because
interesting.
because
Yeah,
if
yeah.
if they have activities that make them need the car and not use the bus on 3 or 4 days out of the 5, and then we can.
Sports teams usually
Yeah, 5
4
days
or
a week.
5 days.
That's what I'm saying. But
Six.
just as a question, if we can actually go there, I think it might actually be an interesting.
Yeah, okay, let me see how it works.
And definitely a crowd pleaser. Is what reason.
All
We
right.
like Peter
Okay,
Crafty.
so, I think we're done with it. School committee goals.
Okay, I should pull them up already. So, as discussed last time, we sent these around again. What you have here linked is how I edited them based on our last discussion. It was just a few small edits under, regarding policy, that we changed it to subcommittee process review, that we called the next category areas of awareness. The next category is updates desired, and we added to the end of our housekeeping items to finish the trip approvals for this year and to review the trip approval process. That's the same for both, and then the second page of that document that you have linked there is the same thing, but just not showing the edits. So I think this is just a quick vote, unless anybody else is
Make a
any
motion to-
urgent.
To approve the school
Comment.
committee goals.
Is that for both committees?
Correct.
Is there a second?
Second
Is that for both committees?
for both committees.
All right, any further discussion of this?
Well, minor, but I'm glad it says responsibilities too, because I don't think this is a traditional goal statement.
It's not, and we,
Okay, but I'm fine with it.
yeah, in fact, I've struggled a little with the fact that in the past we had just a few goals and we detailed very clearly what the outcomes were and how to measure them. And this became more of as it started, a brainstorming kind of bucket list. And I do think as we go through it, we need to be careful that we focus on really primarily for the rest of the year, our yearly responsibilities and the 1920 goals. Those are the things we really have to hone in on and focus on.
Yep.
And we need to make our decisions and prioritize our time accordingly. And also get done the trip approval process.
Yes. Building on what Dave said earlier this evening, and everybody said that I think that the review trip approval process, first of all, I don't think it's a process that you review, but review trip approval or trip international or trips big picture. And I think it should, as I said before, should go into the 2019-2020 goals, because it was clearly declared that that's something we're going to do this year. So I think it's a goal for this year. It's not housekeeping and it's not trip approval process, but the big picture of actually overnight trips in general, not only.
I agree with that.
So is it possible to make the edits?
Yeah, we can vote on
We
something.
can vote on it as edited if we move that into
Clear.
goals, into 1920 goals. As in 19/20.
I think that's reasonable, I mean, we've
It's
We're
consistent.
gonna do it anyway.
committed ourselves
It's
to
very
doing this.
consistent with what we decided.
If we wouldn't, it wouldn't be on here if we had voted the goals.
So what's the
Timely
exact,
manner after we
what's the
did this
exact
process.
edit?
So the exact edit is to take the review trip approval process item and move it up under 2019-2020 goals.
But not as a review trip approval process, but a review.
I wouldn't even say establish trip policy. I mean, I make it a big deal.
Overnight trip policy, yeah, or big picture, whatever, sorry. It's
Sure,
not, it's
philosophy.
not the approval process that we're reviewing, it's the whole philosophy behind it.
Well, I think we could say review, review trip,
Planning process?
overnight trip,
Requirements. Big picture.
how about policy and practice, something like that.
Policy and practice, okay,
We're talking about 1920.
Talking about 21.
Okay.
for
Maybe we should
21,
say-
20, we're done with 20, I mean, 20's,
yes.
No, I'm saying
I think we're pretty clear we got 20
20
taken care
Eh,
of, barring any unforeseen.
20 is under housekeeping, that's appropriate.
Right, exactly. Okay, so the edit is to take the review trip approval process item and change it to, was it review or establish? How did you read it? Review trip,
Overnight trip,
overnight,
policy and practice.
I think it should be established.
I agree.
can't put it on here, okay. So it is to be, let me write this as I go, because I can't type in there. Establish overnight trip policy and practices. Everybody okay with that? And
Dave,
practice.
it's not review and revise, I mean, we have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have one,
Is
I
that-
think
is
we're
that-
reviewing.
Revise, it's tabula rasa,
Yeah.
it's not.
Guys, honestly, no, I'm sorry, it's not semantics, because what David said before, and I think we all agreed, is it's not, we don't have a philosophy behind it. We have a proven process, and we said that we have problems not only in the process of approval, but with the whole philosophy of the strips.
Well, no, I don't, but we are getting into semantics, because the committee hasn't discussed this, we don't know that the committee as a group feels like we have that.
Agreed, no, I
Right,
So
said
hence the word establish and not review.
It's gonna end up
Look,
with.
I don't wanna spend.
I don't wanna
let's not
spend a
get
lot of
about
time
this.
debating.
It should have happened
Um,
last meeting, but yeah.
Ultimately, it's
I
gonna
would
be an
prefer-
established, so,
Right.
okay.
Whatever, let's just get it.
I would prefer review, but I'm not gonna debate it. So establish overnight trip policy and practice will go under 2019-2020 goals. That's the edit.
Good.
Okay,
So
did you wanna revise your motion to be as edited?
Correct, yes, so I'll revise my motion, is that, do I have to just say it all over again?
Just to
Withdraw your motion
approve,
to make another one.
I'll withdraw my motion, and I'd like to, recommend that we approve the school committee goals for both districts as edited.
Second,
for both districts?
for both districts.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor for Concord?
I
Aye.
Aye.
All
Any
in favor for
opposed?
the
Any opposed?
all in favor for the region?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
All right,
So thanks for
moving on.
pulling this together.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Okay, do you wanna do the OPEB piece?
Jared's gonna do it.
Yes.
So, let me pull it up. So what we need to do basically is a resolution for adoption that the position of Assistant Deputy Superintendent of Finance was the former trustee of the OPEB Trust. And now I'm recommending we make that the Director of Finance and Operations. And here's the language that's suggested that we used in the past,
The line, here's, in this
In this,
document you're talking
yeah.
about, yeah. I mean, this looks like something
Yeah,
that
so-
comes from this comes from somewhere, I don't think anybody here wrote this.
No, this is from, and I have a memo that I put together. This is actually back from 2014. So I did a little research since our last meeting on basically the procedure, how the OPEB trust was developed. So back in 2014, the region voted to establish and create the trust. So both Carlisle and Concord voted on that. Included also in this memo is our portfolio and what we currently invest in. as well as the expense ratios, and obviously our current balance. So we basically about 12% are in moderate and 88% are in aggressive, which based on the long-term investment of OPEB, I think it's a proper vehicle.
But tonight you just need us to read the
Tonight,
language
that's all we did, because
and
right
just
now.
change the title.
Yeah.
So it reflects your current.
Yeah, I think when we brought up the topic and saw the title change, some questions came up, rightfully so. So Jerry's tried to provide your history and background as to how we got where we are and how we're operating so that everyone's clear.
Okay.
So I'd asked you guys a couple of questions that I don't recall getting an answer. I got some answers. So you're becoming the trustee.
Correct.
When Clary left, somebody else stepped in, I guess.
No.
There was no trustee.
There's no trustee.
Okay. But I'm, at least in the private sector, I'm familiar with an investment committee that would be separate from the trustee, who would actually analyze, these investment decisions, expense ratio, mix, horizon, blah, 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 and come up with recommendations. So it wouldn't be the sole purview of the trustee.
Right. The region has not established that. So these are our initial investments. But we do not have a subcommittee on that. They have, I think, followed the some of the Concord subcommittee meetings. But no, we don't
I
have.
think we've been
Well, okay.
mirroring Concord's
Concord.
decisions.
We do have Concord has an investment committee.
Right.
Of some strong folks in this space, and we have mirrored that rather than try to put together it's the investment committee that's responsible for OPEB, it's responsible for things like the Hugh Cargill Trust. I mean, any public trust in the town of Concord that has an investment strategy, the investment strategy is put together by that group. And what we have done in practice is mirror what they've recommended for the town. I don't know that we need to change that. We can certainly talk about it if we think it's, I think we would have a hard time putting together.
Well, it's an oversight issue, right? It's a 25% Carlisle asset. Carlisle also has an investment committee that does the same as what you judge. And I would offer that they also have smart people. I just think because we're a region, I'm not saying that we would go against the recommendations. In fact, I very much don't want to reinvent the wheel. But I always feel compelled here to wave the Carlisle flag and say, wait a minute, guys, this is a region, it's not the town of Concord. So there may be some future date where there's some wackadoodles on that committee, and we shouldn't be blindly following that because we are independent. And so I think from a procedure standpoint, from a process standpoint, if we had an independent committee, and if all they did was review what the Concord committee done and say, that sounds good, that's okay, I'm fine with that. But to just say we follow Concord, I can't accept that.
That wouldn't impact us from making this.
No, but I want to understand a commitment from this side, on my left, that we'll take that up rather than, we need to put a trustee in place, there's no question. But, I just feel like that's an example of, quite frankly, being somewhat insensitive to the Carlisle piece. And so I'm just saying, I think as a region, we should establish a committee. I don't know if that's from people on this sitting here or we pull them from wherever, just to review it, to make sure that everything's in alignment. I don't think it's too much to ask with $4 million of assets.
Well, I have a suggestion. I think we need to, maybe you should work with the chair I think we need to discuss this as a committee. I don't think it's appropriate to ask Lori to go off and put this together. I think we need to vote as a committee that we would think this is the appropriate thing to do. But I don't think we can do that tonight.
No, not tonight.
I'm not asking for a vote tonight, I'm
Right.
raising an issue.
I know, but
An issue to
In a
look at
public
going
meeting.
forward, yep.
No, I understand, but I'm saying, I don't think it's appropriate to direct Lori to do, Dr. Hunter to do anything. I think we need to, as a committee, discuss that we would like her to go off and do something.
Okay.
So we will talk about that. Okay, any other discussions about the motion?
I was gonna read it.
Do we, have we been given language for this one?
Just by way of a reminder, we get these figures certified every January, is that correct?
Every January, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion that we adopt the resolution before us, basically naming the trustee of the
Naming a Director of Finance and
OPEB.
Operations, trustee of the OPEB fund, is
With the OPEB trust.
that OPEB trust? And there's no change in district accountant as
Nope.
recipient of? Okay.
Is that sufficient?
So
It is, and
could
I
you-
apologize for not
could you
using
just
the
make a
language,
motion?
I tried, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Can you read it again?
Okay,
Yes,
say it
please.
again.
Because we're gonna need to get it.
So,
down.
I move for the region that we appoint the Director of Finance and Operations as the trustee for the OPEB fund in the form currently of the Vantage Care Retirement Health Savings Program.
Second.
Any discussion? All in
With-
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. I'd like to make a request that we, on things especially like
No,
this.
you need the motion
Yeah,
language.
we have the
That's my
motion
fault. My
language.
apologies.
Thank
Yeah, understood.
I would take a motion to adjourn the region.
I move to adjourn the region.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Right, we got you guys out of here.
It's gonna be 10 minutes.
This should be quick, yeah. We're gonna look at the CPS capital plan. Jared's busy for a minute, so Laurie can pull it.
I got it.
Sorry, Sarah.
Sarah,
We actually need Jared presenting now, so sorry.
So
Okay.
while Jared's regrouping there, just to talk on the CPS capital plan.
Yep.
So we've strategized this a couple of different ways and he can talk you through some of the details. But we've reworked, what you're used to seeing is one item's, sometimes the big ticket items are really phased out year after year after year, and it takes us 5 years to finish it, and the ERUs are gonna be the big discussion tonight on that. And so, we had it drafted that way, and then as we were reviewing it, I just posed a thought that would it make more sense to more cluster things, so that we really took on one major portion. Oh, Russ, just in time. Russ Hughes is our new facility manager, is here to really explain what we're proposing. Russ, come sit at the table. So we're kind of in a different mode, different approach than we've been in, where if we had parceled this out, we would have done a little bit at each school, and instead we're proposing, let's just talk about one school at a time and try to see how far we can get with the monies allocated out of the town manager's budget. So that's why it says elementaries, because we need more, it's chicken and the egg again, until we have some money, they can't give us a price and we can't be quite sure how far the money's gonna go.
Right.
So we may get to 2 schools instead of 1. The hope would be that we finish either Alcott or Thoreau, if the money will go far enough to do that, and then get as much done in the other school as possible, and then the remaining goes into the FY 22.
What about grants or?
The ERUs don't seem to be eligible, so I'll let
Okay,
them talk more on
that's fine.
that, but that was more of our, talking more strategy at
Yep.
this point, to really front load one project rather than parcel out. The good news is we've done a lot of work over the last year, so we don't have big lists of $50,000 here and $50,000 there.
This is the most simple
Yeah.
capital plan. we've
Yeah,
seen
and
in
it's,
years.
so really it's gonna be ERUs and placeholder money at the middle schools, just for all the things we can't predict. So a very different approach, and then we make our way to Ripley after we've done the ERU work at the elementaries. So I'm gonna let them talk, if you don't mind listening for a little bit longer, I think they could talk a little bit more on the facility side of it all, not just the financial strategy.
That'd be great.
I'll start and then let Russ lead with it. So as Dr. Hunter said, we wanted to get the ERUs done in the first 2 years. We won't know the exact cost of what they will be until we really do the first one. We're hoping to retrofit instead of replace. We figured that there'd be some savings if we don't have to replace everything. So that would be the plan, and for both the Thoreau and the Alcott. Going further down, other costs this year would just be the safety that we always have in there of the $50,000 for the PVD and the Sanborn, and then at the Willard, an AC chiller replacement. So we have a placeholder right now of $900,000. There could be a potential of $1 million right now. I know that was the recommendation of Kerry LaFleur, but we're going with the $900,000, and if we do get that extra $100,000, we would probably put that back into the ERUs. So those are pretty much the same plans for FY21 and FY22. There's a couple other things that we're planning on for FY22 at the Willard, including potentially a carpet replacement there, RTU exterior insulation replacement, and then the boiler exhaust. We thought that those could not wait any longer.
Can I ask that the boiler exhaust get moved to this year somehow or another? Because it clearly says down here it's a health and safety issue, and I hate driving by those words. It's, 20,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I can
Yeah,
I
take
can
a
look
look at
into
it.
that, and if there's a,
Yeah, the question, yeah.
Otherwise, that makes a lot of sense.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
what you're doing.
The ERUs there's multiple
Yes.
units at each building, so
Right.
correct,
we can theoretically, if we, like you said, complete one building and we've got $200,000, we can do some of the other ones.
right.
Is that gonna be the most cost-effective way from a bid
For,
standpoint?
yes, and for planning and like what Jared said, some of the units, they have to be replaced. I was told that the Alcott, I'm just getting my arms around it and looking into this after being here almost 4 months. I was talking to an engineer, I guess when the Alcott was first designed, it did not have air conditioning
Correct.
in it. So they they did some retrofits to the ERUs, so the engineering firm was just saying, these have to be replaced.
Right.
So, but at some of the other schools, they could be refurbished or,
Okay.
just some internal components could be replaced. But back to your point, Wally, we'll have a better way to bid it and price it once we do the first.
And you're gonna start with Alcott.
Yes.
So it's
absolutely, yeah.
probably the,
Alcott's one
the
where
worst
the
or something?
oldest and
Yeah.
the ones that there's some problems
Okay.
over there, and then the Thoreau would be next.
Right.
And then the Willard for this year, that AC chiller, it's a 2-stage chiller,
Mhm.
so only one stage is working right now.
Right.
So there's no redundancy. If we lose that other stage, Willard will
That's a
have no
problem.
AC. Yeah. And as far as the exhaust for the boiler, I haven't been able to look into that yet.
Okay.
Let's, I can.
All right.
Can I just make a recommendation that somewhere we write down what ERU stands for?
Sorry?
energy recovery unit?
Yes, energy recovery unit, basically it's a heat exchanger.
Yeah, I'm just, for people who are
Yeah,
gonna
no,
Right,
kind of see
right,
this,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
have no idea, it's
Yeah,
$780,000
I didn't know what it is, but I asked.
Right.
an acronym.
Right.
So
Good.
the only thing I wanted to say about my little experience is many times the immediate financials is pushing us to take decisions of immediate saving, like retrofit and refurbishing, instead of buying a new. And in the long term, it doesn't prove itself to be the right solution.
Right.
So the idea is and many times all of us are kind of, because we don't have the cash available now, we take those decisions that's 3 years down the line.
Right.
So to be sensitive about it, and maybe if the feasibility dictates new systems, maybe come back here and find the budget for the new system rather than
Okay.
patch.
Right, putting
And
Band-Aids
in the
on
long
it,
run,
just-
it will be a
right.
much more expensive solution.
Do you want to
Everything's a lot.
explain? Do you want to explain what the retrofit means? It's more of the base that can last for a long time. That you don't have to replace the base.
The
The
No,
cover.
internal components,
Yeah.
is like a flywheel in there and motors and, coils and things like that. So replacing them, that's what I mean by retrofit. But I understand what you're saying too. If the outside
With
casing is gonna
warranties
fail,
and with
right,
warranties and
Yeah.
long-term
Correct.
new service contracts, at times it's easier to
Yeah.
invest upfront and it will save you.
Well, so maybe let's pose that as a question. In this case, do you feel like retrofitting is just as good a long-term investment, or
replacement would be the best way to go.
okay?
It's,
But you haven't really come to that, you're trying to make that determination at this point.
After talking with this engineering firm, especially for the Alcott, we have to replace the units
you
at the Alcott. So once that's done, we're gonna have a price, we'll know how much it is to replace. And then, I believe the Alcott's 14, 15 years old.
Yep.
So if you had another school where you have the units only 5 or 10 years, then you make the decision, or do we retrofit it or replace it?
Okay,
Look
so
at
we
what
can look
funds
at
we
them
have available.
case by
and-
case.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's
Okay.
basically what it is.
All right. Great.
This isn't a vote, this is just, you're presenting us with the.
This is just, I'm not voting on anything. This is just
No.
for our
Okay.
reference and understanding and.
Great.
And basically it starts to tee up what we're gonna be looking at in terms of warrant articles
No,
very
I
soon.
understand that.
All of this fits into the town manager's capital
Yeah, we
budget
aren't
for us,
proposing
so-
any additional warrant articles for CPS
Right.
Right.
outside of the
This-
middle school down the road.
Just
That's
a
good way
little
to
bit
pitch
of
it. That's a good way to pitch it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
The 760, is that are you gonna, when we vote the article, are we gonna have a better understanding of what that looks like, or are we only gonna go out to bid after we've approved the article?
When
Either
when
answer
do
is
you vote the article?
Well, we will be
Submitting it.
we'll be going out to bid
Pending funding.
pending funding beforehand, so we'll know.
But we
know
will, by town meeting.
So
before
when we're
prior-
describing this in front of town meeting, we will say, this is what we're doing, we're replacing blah, blah, blah.
And we'll have
Where
better
this
costs.
It'll be
Good.
10
Thanks.
replacements, 5 retrofits, or vice versa, or whatever it may be. Okay.
Thank you.
I made up those numbers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with reality.
Yeah.
In schools.
I should have said
I
X
thought you were,
replacements and Y.
I thought you were an HVAC guy.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm an expert in
In your
everything.
other life.
We wanna line up the work too, because if you wait too long, you're probably paying a premium, or it's not gonna happen during the summer as well. So,
Right.
Yeah. You want to do it in the summer.
This is
Okay,
terrific. Thank
thank
you for
you.
giving it the
Yeah.
long-term
Yeah.
view there and the reality check of how we've been doing it before versus now. This seems to make a lot of sense. That's great. Any other questions?
No,
Terrific.
Thank you.
Moving right along then. Russ, thanks for being here. Perfect timing.
Yeah, not a
How'd
problem.
you time
I
that?
know.
Have a good night.
Oh, he was here.
Thanks,
We
Russ.
had,
You shouldn't say that, don't tell us.
But it came too quick.
Don't be a stranger. Just don't bring any bad news.
Exactly. Okay, so we can do a quick middle school building update. In fact, I will use our official update. We now have updates after each building committee meeting that are going to be sent out to various groups in town and used by the liaisons for updating their groups. So I'm gonna use that, and it's one of the things that we even touched on. But there were three main things that happened last week. Biggest and most important news is that in terms of designers, we have narrowed it down to the final 5 who will be interviewed tomorrow, all day here. Big show if anybody wants to come. Starting at 9 a.m. and moving along, hour-long interviews, which is basically first a presentation by each of the finalist designers, and then questions. Court, since you were so involved in this.
Questions only from the committee.
Only from the
not
committee.
the-
So observe, exactly, the public may come to observe. We cannot take questions from the audience or from observers purely because we need to keep it a consistent interview experience for all 5 designers. So it would be the same questions coming from,
Because
the
you want to
designer
be in the
subcommittee.
school before 2030.
sorry, yes,
Will
we
it
do.
be taped?
That too,
A little bit more
Recorded.
on
Now.
that if I might.
exactly.
The-
Court's gonna give you more.
The interviews are gonna be conducted by the design subcommittee, so it'll be those 6 members
Yes.
only that will have the dialogue with the firms that are the finalists. And we have determined that we would not have a stock set of questions.
Okay,
And that's very intentional because we have to respond to their presentations.
Yeah.
So many times a presentation will beg a question, sometimes it will address a question. We just simply don't know. But what gives it some consistency is that we have our criteria by which we want to rate the capabilities of these firms. And we're going to be using the same rating criteria that we used for the first go-round with the 14 proposals that came in. We look again with a clean slate. Any ratings and rankings we did to go from 14 to 5 now disappear, and we have 5 brand new, so to speak, contenders tomorrow.
That's great.
And hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, we'll have a recommendation to go to the full school building committee Thursday morning, 7:30. So it's a quick turnaround.
And then there'll be 2 ranked
There will be
Finalists?
one that is considered the
whatever.
first recommendation.
Right.
Another one is a second or alternate should the town manager not be successful with negotiations that he is responsible for with the firm that's recommended.
And after Thursday's meeting with the building committee, be able to send out a blast identifying those 2?
Good question. I believe so.
That's public.
Well, we've got to give Hill time to contact all the firms first, so we'll have to work the timetable on the public
But
announcement.
you'll be saying the names in public.
But it'll
Yeah.
be public,
Right.
because it's at a public meeting,
Right.
yes.
I know, right, with the caveats that
Right.
some work still needs to be done. You could-
Generally, I know with the OPM, we only put the name out of the first recommendation and then quietly did the second one.
That's fine.
Just,
I
you
think
know,
that's
it's like you're hiring, you
No,
hire
no, that's-
someone, you don't announce
Right.
the person,
The
and
second
then you
round.
sort of name
No,
is
no,
back
no,
up, so,
that makes sense, yeah.
yeah.
Very
Yeah, we would
exciting.
just need to give Hill time to make that in-person phone call to those who aren't
Understood.
selected.
Yeah, no, I
As much
understand.
as it's public, we
Yeah.
would want a little
Yeah.
personal touch.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
so-
but at some point afterwards, when it's appropriate, yes, we will certainly announce
Absolutely.
who the
Absolutely.
recommended firm is. Of course, we're very involved with
Thank you
this,
for
chairing
all your
the
work.
designer subcommittee.
I think we can say it again, the 14 firms were all very, very capable, and we're delighted they were interested in the Concord project, and I think the 5 that are now being considered are excellent for us to work with, and hopefully will yield one that will do excellent work for us.
thank you, this is a big day tomorrow, so I appreciate all of your work.
It is, and yes, I think you asked if it was being recorded, it is definitely being recorded. I'll
Even though
be-
there's not, it's useful, I think, sometimes for people to go back and just watch it.
It'll be
Oh,
recorded,
absolutely.
and of
Or-
course it can't go out live.
No.
Right,
Simply for obvious reasons.
Right, for obvious reasons. No, I know, for those of us who may have teacher conferences and kids at home tomorrow, I, for instance, can't be here all day, so we'll be watching at least some, if not all of them.
There's only one of you?
That's right. I know I make it look there otherwise, but, so yes, they will be recorded. and we're all looking forward to watching them. The next thing that the building committee, I'm sorry.
Building, yeah, you might bring us up to date on the new dates, just for the public, because we revised our meeting schedule.
We did.
Yes,
If one of us
we
has that
did.
handy.
I have that coming up.
Good,
I'm
thank
going
you.
through
Excellent.
this. Let me just go through quickly the other two things we
Can
hit
I
on at the
just
meeting.
suggest we do that, wait till this Thursday meeting, cause the whole building committee hasn't signed
Perfect.
off on those
Ah,
dates,
okay.
those were proposals from the chair to the
It's a proposal.
subcommittee chairs.
So message, stay tuned, we're looking
Yeah.
at our schedule.
Yeah, we're
Good.
looking at our
Okay.
schedule.
Thank you.
Good point, yes. So other two things at our meeting last Thursday, a couple of the folks on our sustainability subcommittee did basically an education for the rest of us on the building committee about sustainability in building design and some of the aspects and questions that we'll be looking at. It was not a discussion of plans and what we're going to do. It was purely a, please get the rest of us up to speed on terminology and technologies and the kinds of things that we'll be looking at and learning about as we try to plan for a very sustainable building. So it was a great educational session. Matt Root, who is a sustainable building design expert, really took us through a lot, and it was terrific. So
It's available on the website.
and that is available on the website as well. So anybody can feel free to educate yourself. It was great for those of us on the building committee to get more of a feel for what we'll be talking about. And then we also talked about community engagement, went through our draft of a communications plan, the crux of which is that we are doing our best to obviously not only make it a transparent process, but to share out information as proactively as we can. All the information will be posted on our website, on the district. There'll be a basic version of that on the town website also. And we will be sending out regular updates. So after each meeting, we'll be creating an update just like I'm using now to kind of highlight the milestones and progress. And that will be going out to multiple groups in town, either to be shared just directly with that group or to be included in their newsletters as a headline with a link to the update. So if there are any groups out there who want to be included in this, please be in touch with the building committee. On our website already, we have a link that's be in touch with the building committee, and that will come straight to us or to the chairs. So we're looking forward to really sharing this out as much as we can. Again, it'll go out by emails. We'll also be using social media. We have liaisons who will be reporting back to various groups. And going forward, we will be hosting some live events, so to speak, also. In addition to, as we've already talked about, going forward, there will be forums at which we will collect input on, and that will be a little further down the line, though, closer to the design stage, when we're really looking at what do we want in this building. We've done some of that initially, and we'll do more of it. But before then, we're gonna plan some coffees, like we do as school, like we've done in the past in terms of school committee coffees. We're gonna have some building committee coffees where two of us will host we'll alternate morning or evening, but host just a small casual event for people to come and learn what the latest is and ask questions.
Great.
So that's the plan. If people have feedback and thoughts, send it all my way. And that's where the building committee is. Overall, I'd still say it's just going fabulously.
Good.
Very smooth process. Anything I've missed, Cory?
No, not a bit, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else before we wrap up? Then I would take a motion to adjourn the Concord School Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. Done before.